Invention Education, Portraits, Strategies, Starting Points is a series of podcasts intended to share interesting, inspiring, and actionable information about invention education. Sponsored by the Lemelson Foundation and supported by the STEM Learning Ecosystem's community of practice, this series is one of many ways we're aligning to help ensure that students get the tools and supports they need to invent a better tomorrow. My name is Jeremy Shore, and throughout this series, we'll be joined by families, students, and experts in the field who will share their own experiences and lessons learned. You can find me on Twitter at Jeremy Shore, and today I'm excited to learn more about the ways that invention education can prepare young people for the global challenges of today and tomorrow, and I hope you are too. In this episode of Portraits, Strategies, Starting Points, I'm joined by Dr. Rudy Reyna, lead of the Alamo STEM ecosystem. Dr. Reyna grew up in a barrio on the south side of San Antonio, where his mom was the most educated parent with a second grade education. Through his parents' support, he had a successful K-12 education and was fortunate to be exposed to computers in high school well before most people knew what a computer was. After finishing an undergrad in electrical engineering, he started a corporate career with Bell Telephone Laboratories. After a 28-year career in the telecom industry, including serving as president of the SBC Foundation, he headed up the National STEM-based Pre-Freshman Engineering Program at UTSA, which provided high school credit for middle school students and college credit for high school students, both summer programs. His passion is STEM education, as he knows firsthand how it changed his life, and in post-retirement, he continues to be involved with STEM education with a focus on equity for students who in this day and time still live in the same environment he grew up in and have the same obstacles he experienced. Dr. Reyna, I remember my dad telling me about the first computer he ever touched, which was the size of our living room and basically did basic accounting. My first computer was a VIC-20, and to this day I can vividly remember the faint electrical and plastic smell that it released when it was running. Do you remember your first time with a computer?
Absolutely, Jeremy. And it was actually a major kind of, I don't know, something that probably should have never happened and could have never happened in my environment. As you mentioned, growing up in a barrio and everything, I was in high school, and we had decent courses in high school, even though we didn't have calculus. It wasn't offered in my high school. It was an inner city. Like I said, I grew up in the barrio, but I happened to ask my geometry teacher, of all things. At that time, she had been, geometry and then algebra now, and I asked her what is a computer, and she looked at me and she says, Raul, I really don't know, and she says, but let me see what I can find out, and I wasn't sure what to expect. I certainly didn't have any clues to what we were dealing with. I forgot how I even saw the word, and but primarily, you have to understand there would have been really no one in my environment that had any reason to even wonder what such a word came from. So to her credit, bless her heart, and I say that because teachers make such an impact in our lives. She came back and after some, I guess, research and actually going to one of the local universities and talking to some of the folks there, and said, Raul, I guess I've got some information from you, and I have a better idea what a computer is, she said, even though I'm not sure what what it is and how it all works. But I have provided an opportunity for you to go and use the computers. These were the large, 1601, 1620 computers like your dad mentioned to you. That were, occupied, large rooms of equipment, full of equipment. And she says, but you're going to get to go there, and they're going to let you use the equipment. And I think the key thing here is that having access to equipment hands-on, that's such an important aspect of our educational process, the relevance, the ability to do something and to be able to experience it. I could have read about it. She could have got me some articles, but it would have never been the same. And so I started, going through the process, and it involved a lot of detail. It involved toggling switches. It involved loading card decks. It involved, all kinds of stuff to run software and develop software. So I learned and taught myself how to write Fortran programs, and some basic ones, and then I got more and more sophisticated as I learned more how to do this. But the great part of it was that I had, could go in and out, and they trusted me.
Mm.
And remember, this meant so much because I had never stepped foot on a college campus or a university campus prior to that. So had no idea. And my mom and dad, of course, were the same. So that helped me in terms of, that side of it. But again, the bottom line is I was able to start writing software. And when I was a senior, one of the great things was that I decided to run the milk and oil drop experiment, which is really used to calculate the charge of an electron.
Hmm.
And I did it in my lab in my room at home, which really wasn't conducive to anything, but it allowed me to still capture information and a lot of different trials and these really long equations that would have taken me forever. So what I did is I just entered all the data and ran everything through, and I was able to run multiple 50, 60 more cases, and come up with a kind of like a summary. And I remember my physics teacher at that time, it drove him bananas because he didn't understand software and had not ever worked with a computer. So he didn't know if I was really using the computer. So he was basically hoping that I was really doing what I said I was doing, which I was, and as opposed to just printing a number, that maybe resembled the charge of an electron. But fortunately, it helped me a lot. And from there on, once I went to A&M, and they didn't have an undergrad in computer science, I went ahead and majored in electrical engineering to learn about the hardware side, and eventually worked at their data processing center. But not, all of this would have never happened if I had not been exposed to something that allowed me to have hands-on experience. And that's one of the reasons that I connect that with inventions, because in many ways, that's about hands-on. It's
Mm.
about, going through that invention process, and at many levels, whether you're at a K-12 level or beyond, but particularly elementary, middle, or high school level. And in many ways, I was inventing software, because for me, I had, never seen software. I had never seen, algorithms that worked and had been developed to solve problems. So this gave me an opportunity in an indirect way to really, go through that kind of a process. And it's still something that people to date, I mean, can invent apps, right? Apps that we
Hmm.
see that are useful for different purposes. So it was a great opportunity. And again, had it not been for my teacher, because in my school I would have never had access to computers.
I
So
love
that
these stories. I love the stories where we get to, people who've had some success in their lives, kind of bring it down to that one experience, because when we talk about those things, we realize that we all can potentially be that person who brings the experience to somebody, maybe to lots of people, but even just to one person. I wonder in your career, in your career and your post-retirement career, if you've had that opportunity to be the guy that then brings that experience to to a young person.
I've been very blessed because when I was heading up the Southwestern Bell Foundation, which is now AT&T. Um, Nothing to do with me personally, but the fact that how foundations work. I had an opportunity to work with superintendents around the state and the country, even, and educators. John Goodlatte, folks, that basically I would have never had access to, as well as universities, all because they needed support. And but as a result of that, I created these networks that served a lot of what I wanted to do afterwards. After I went to work with the pre-freshman engineering program, I continued that, and basically because it was a program that really, really worked. There was a lot of opportunity to continue those relationships, and in post-retirement, as things have come up, for example, as I got involved with the STEM learning ecosystem, which obviously is what got me connected with the invention education process and the invention convention process. I was able to bring to San Antonio for example, the Chief Science Officer program. So that would have never come to San Antonio without the STEM learning ecosystem, access to other, if you would, learning communities. And then to answer your question, we started with a small group of 36 students that from multiple school districts in our city, and basically that has grown to over 100 now, and in multiple areas within the state. However, it gave and provided that opportunity, which I've always continued to work on. How do we, bring these, in essence, different initiatives to students? For example, esports, the same thing, bringing them to our students here in our city. So that, again, because of being able to connect with the right resources and the right folks that are involved with these initiatives, has provided an opportunity as grants come up, as other things come up, to work with individuals, within schools, as well as with districts, and also involved with, my alma mater where I went to high school, the school district, and we founded a foundation 10 years ago, and we've given over, $150,000 back to kids and to the educators. So all of those things relate to giving back, and having the opportunity to do so, because been blessed to have, a way to get access to the right decision makers, to allow, through their help, for access to teachers and to administrators and to students that otherwise wouldn't have been there. So that has been really, really what I have focused on personally. And that's what I'm trying to do now with Invention Ed as well.
I'd love to dig into that a little bit more. So it seems like for one of the first times, maybe the first time, there's this really, really broad conversation about equity and disequity. And while certainly there are people who are arguing against it, which is kind of unfathomable, most of America appears to again, for the first time, be at least more open, if not really kind of diving headlong into how do we address this. The problem is that we don't know how as a nation. We don't really know how as a nation. Individuals do, but as a collective, we don't. So if I'm a person in Cleveland, let's say, because I am a person in Cleveland, and I myself wanted to really dig in and really get started in making sure that students of poverty, students of color, any student who doesn't typically have the same advantages can get them. Where do I start? How do I even begin to tackle this massive and institutional problem?
Well, as a student, it's not always easy because you don't have access to, what else is going on around us, and necessarily, you now people can Google, and obviously there's some great things, but what we really need to provide, Jeremy, because you bring up a very interesting thing, even with Invention Ed. One of the things that we're seeing is that while more first generation, more low-income students, more minority students are getting involved with inventions through their schools or through clubs. More females are getting involved in that process. When you get to the competitive side, in terms of how really good are they getting at the concepts, or how much depth of understanding is there in what they're doing, they're not competing at the same level, of course, as the affluent students. Which is, again, not unlike what you see in SATs and those kinds of things. So what we really need to do is for these students, because they don't have a lot of times the role models at home. They don't have basically the resources or the infrastructure at home, is we need to provide them with either inventors, access to inventors, or access to mentors from a business side, from basically the what I would call corporate side, from the community that they live in. And again, that's why I say they may not know how to find those people, but what we need to do as educators, and which is one of the things I'm trying to do with the pilot here in San Antonio, is involve organizations that can really provide those kinds of, in essence, support systems. For example, I'm working at a national level with the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. And, these are folks that basically, if in San Antonio, we have many districts that are predominantly Hispanic. And so if you're trying to connect that, you would, if you're, let's say, in Dallas, Houston, or let's say where there's a larger population of African American students, then you might want to connect with the Black professional engineers,
Mm.
in essence, because they can provide the mentorship to help, you, if you're the student that is basically not able to access the resources, you don't have a knowledge of, what it might take to really work and improve your invention, and the kinds of resources physically that you might need to help you, really get a better understanding of what you're doing. It's folks like that who can help you because they will resemble you. You can say, look, if they can do this, I can someday do it as well. And of course, they want to help with the education process. And now with the online environment that we live in, it's even conducive. You don't have to be in the same city. You don't have to be in the same, right adjacent even. You can, if you are, that's great, but you can now use basically the online, in essence, systems that you have to be able to periodically interact with teams of students. So that's what we really, those are some of the things we really need, because what we do see, as I mentioned, is in the current situation, as you go up the ladder, so to speak, in terms of the invention convention competitions,
Hmm.
uh, the kids that are coming from the lower income areas are not competing as well. And it's understandable because they're not really grounded. They don't have the same foundation. And I can relate to it because I compare myself sometimes to a friend of mine who's an inventor that I know very well here. And while he was working with kids, when he was, 8 or 9, 10, 11 years old, I was out riding bikes in the summer. I was out, which is, nothing wrong with either one. But the bottom
Hmm.
line, if I had had that opportunity, I could have certainly learned a lot more about, how things work and have a better understanding. And that really affected me even later in life, because when I was in high school, while I understood how to work with equations and how to basically plug numbers in, I didn't have the conceptual depth that some of my when I went to university and had other kids around me, that some of them had, because they had more basic, in essence, resources to work with. And so they were able to, for whatever reason, because of role models, because of whatever basically infrastructure that they had to deal with, provided them with the hands-on, going back to that hands-on opportunity that I missed in pretty much everything except for computers, just because I was very lucky. So that makes a big difference in developing, the in essence, foundation that will help you through the invention process to become better grounded, so that you are able to do whatever you do later in life with a better understanding of the conceptual side of things.
What that also highlights to me is I know there are a lot of people who want to make a change, but they're not electrical engineers or things of this level. And what I've learned through the years is it's amazing how many times you'll have teachers or parents in a room with professors, researchers, industry people, and how often those two groups say, oh my gosh, I've wanted to work together for years. I just haven't known how to get started. A lot of people want to be inspiring, want to help kids, but they don't know how to they don't think teachers want them in their schools. And a lot of teachers want people in their schools, but they say they don't want to spend their time, but they do. So there's this role too for conveners, not just the experts, but just for people who can bring people together and connect them in new and powerful ways. And I know that's a lot of what you're doing with your work in San Antonio too.
Exactly, yeah, because what we're trying to do is bring large groups together. For example, there's a group called the Intercultural Development Research Association that focuses on STEM and equity. So remember, equity is one of the things you were talking about, that we're becoming more and more aware of the value of that, especially when you look at the fact that 1 out of every 4 kids right now, elementary, middle school are basically minority and Hispanic, for example. So if we don't do something to close that gap and to really involve them and to really utilize, their, in essence, the resource that they will present to us as they grow older, we're going to miss a boat as a country because we're not going to have, in essence, the brain power that we need to continue to compete. So yeah, we definitely need to have, an opportunity for people to come together and help other organizations working with groups like You Teach that basically help support pre-service teachers who are going to be involved with STEM.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, if we get those pre-service teachers involved with the invention process and also involved with inner city schools, then we multiply our efforts. So there's that collaborative side of things and the cross-sector side of things that you're bringing up is very important.
Well, Raul, I met you a couple of years ago. I got to spend more time with you in San Antonio, where I learned I could very easily talk to you for about 6 hours straight, and continue to learn from you throughout that entire time. But our time is closing, so I want to ask you the same question that we've been asking everybody in this series: what is the power of invention education?
It really is, number one, that it works across the continuum from elementary, middle, and high school. And more importantly, it gives kids an opportunity to identify a problem that means something to them. And that there's so much power in that, and that they can then take that problem and actually work on some kind of uh, invention that will help solve that problem. And because it's something that's important to them, that's important to their community, that relates to their, barrio, so to speak, then it takes on a different meaning. Then you can get kids more engaged because it's really important not only to solve the problem, but to build something that actually works towards developing that solution that is hands-on. And that hands-on aspect is so important.
I love it. We're always talking in education about the importance of relevance, and what's more relevant than students finding something that's impacting themselves or their communities and working on by themselves or with other classmates to solve that problem. I love it. Thank you for listening to Invention Education, Portraits, Strategies, Starting Points, brought to you by the STEM Learning Ecosystems Community of Practice and the Lemelson Foundation. Thank you, Raul, for joining me today. Please visit www.stemecosystems.org to hear more inspiring podcasts. My name is Jeremy Shore, and thank you for joining us today.